Greetings and welcome everyone to our Service Experience Live Series conversations with customer support, success, experience, and services leaders hosted by Support Logic. This is our second event, and the topic of today's conversation is the evolving role of the Chief Customer Officer. Hello, I'm your host, Omid Razavi at Support Logic, CCO, and it's my great pleasure to have Rod Cherkas as my guest. Rod, whom I've known for about a decade, is a customer success pioneer, post-sales leader, experienced innovator, and accomplished strategic and operational executive. His impressive career spans multiple executive and C-suite roles at Intuit, RingCentral, Marketo, and Narvar. And now he's a CEO of his company, aptly named HelloCCO. Hello, Rod.
Hi, Omid. How are you?
Very good. How are you?
I'm doing great today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. A pleasure to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I've been a post-sale executive and leader for the past 15 years, starting at Intuit, where I ran the post-sales of our payroll service, and then had the opportunity to work at a number of different SaaS companies as they were going through growth stages, as you mentioned, including RingCentral, Marketo, and most recently Gainsight. And I recently started HelloCCO to help work with, it's a consulting firm, working with CEOs, chief customer officers, and other post-sale leaders to help them scale their organizations as they go through the various growth stages. And we'll talk a little bit today about some of the challenges and the evolving role of a chief customer officer. But I'm really excited to talk with you and the audience today.
Wonderful. So let's go to the point. What do you see as the role of a chief customer officer in a technology company?
Yeah, I think one of the evolving roles of the chief customer officer is they need to be able to connect the dots across the various functions in an organization. They're no longer just the voice of the customer providing input about NPS scores or feedback and then disseminating that in the organization, but they're responsible for the operational results. And we can get into a little bit of that later, but how they help all of the functional organizations in their responsibility. That can include professional services, it can include a support organization, it could include a CSM or account management team, sometimes an education organization, service operations, sometimes a sales function. And so making sure that all of those groups are working together to help meet the goals that are set by the company and also the expectations of the clients.
Wonderful. So perhaps back in the day, I remember maybe a couple of decades ago, where some of the early chief customer officers, they were in charge of running customer feedback program, if you will. They were running customer programs like customer advisory board or sometimes even escalation management, dealing with tough customer situations or as well as opportunities for building a deeper relationship with the customer. So that was the traditional role of chief customer officer. What you're explaining is one that expands into operational responsibilities along different service areas. Is that correct?
Yes. I think when the role started, as you mentioned in the past, it was helping turn organizations to be more customer centric. At the time, they were very sales and marketing focused. There was a lot of emphasis on products, with the idea that they would sell themselves and customers would stay for life. But what started to happen and that customer-facing organization or customer-facing leader was really thinking about the customer experience and the importance of experience design in an organization. So they were working a lot cross-functionally. They were frequently driving the use of surveys and feedback mechanisms and trying to pull that into a central repository or central place, and then designing experiences. What was particularly challenging about that is they didn't necessarily have teams or operational responsibilities. They often had to work through other organizations to make those changes happen in the experience. And what I've seen over the past decade with the growth of a lot of SaaS companies is that the CEOs are no longer looking for that leader or the leadership role to just be responsible for being the voice of customer, but actually delivering results and getting the operational improvements that clients expect. So they're thinking about what is not just how does this affect retention, but having that leader responsible for retention. How are teams working together efficiently? Well, they're now responsible for the P&L and the operating margins. So, making sure that there is a direct correlation between the work that a company is doing with their customer-facing teams and the financial or customer-facing outcomes that the business is expecting.
Yeah, wonderful. So this is really an elevated role for a person who actually transitions from running one of the services pillars or support pillars in a company, that they are now part of the executive suite. A lot of times they're also engaged in the board meetings. So it is important that they be equipped with providing some results as a CEO expects or the company expects, and not just be the voice of the customer. I just want to actually ask you this trend that, way back when it was, getting customer sentiment and getting customer feedback was not easy. And that's probably why you had a person who was in charge of this, to run the survey program, sort of, be the eyes and ears of the company as far as what customers are telling. But now today, everyone has a listening post, and probably everyone has a touch point with the customer. Marketing does, sales does, each of the post-sale services do. So it's sort of democratized. So really expect a person be just at the board level, if you will, at the executive seat level, just to bring those perspectives alone is not the value add. Right. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Now there's software, and a lot of companies have put in place mechanisms to be listening for customer information, whether it's through CSAT surveys, NPS surveys. They're doing analysis of calls through voice and sentiment on social media. So there's a lot of information coming in. So no shortage of data. And the question is, what do you do with it? And this leader now is not only responsible for gathering the data, but actually doing something with it to move some of the key metrics that this CCO or other executives in that post-sale leadership role are expecting to deliver. And that is where this role gets particularly challenging, because there are, depending on your company, different metrics and different priorities that are important for your CFO, your CEO, or perhaps your board. And one of the challenges and one of the opportunities for this leadership role is to understand what those priorities are from above, and then translate that into initiatives and improvement that help deliver.
Oh, that's awesome. I think this is probably one of the differences, as you mentioned, is that you get to define the role. When you're at the C level, you get to define what is it actually important. And it seems like a distinction between a CCO and a VP of service is that the CCO hallmark is the ability to create and drive customer strategy across the company, unencumbered by boundaries imposed by traditional silos or business units. Right. Many of them actually within the services organization as well. So that is probably what makes a CCO different from a VP of service, if you will, that's primarily focused on the delivery of that service area.
Yeah, the skills to be an effective chief customer officer require them to have experience or at least knowledge of a variety of different functions and the various levers required of those functions. For example, if you're leading an organization that has a professional services team as part of it, you need to be able to understand what the key metrics are, the fact that is more of potentially a business that you're managing the costs and expenses and the P&L, and that your leadership team is expecting potentially margin improvement over time. And what are the levers around that, whether you have internal staff, subcontractors, partners that you're working with. In a support organization, the metrics are quite different. Sometimes it's viewed where the metrics are support costs as a % of revenue. And obviously you care about the customer experience and the employee experience, but there might be just, the CCO has responsibilities for delivering those outcomes. And then in the CSM world, similar thing. There's retention rates. There's sort of the NPS or CSAT. A lot of CSM organizations either are responsible for or contribute to expansion. So the skills required to be an effective CCO require potentially a broad set of work experience through your career, or at least visibility to those various levers.
All right. You mentioned a number of metrics, and when you think about also support organization, professional services, customer success, education, each of them have their own metrics. Now, in a C-level environment where each of the executives have one or two metrics, how is it? Is it unavoidable for a CCO to come up with a set of 17 or 19 metrics, or you think that they should consolidate on just a few that are important to CEO and executive team as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is the CCO needs to be really in tune to what is important for the company at that time. And I think the needs of an organization change. So for example, if you were getting hired as a CCO at a company, or being promoted into that role, it would be a great opportunity to have a very clear discussion with the CEO and the CFO about what are the expectations for the role, what are the key metrics that are important for the company, over the next 12 to 24 months, because it's likely that there is some burning platform. If you're a company that is thinking about another funding round or IPO, where you're going to be needing to share information with investors, it's possible that one of your metrics might need to improve. Now, knowing whether that metric is retention rate, whether it's net dollar retention, which includes the expansion, whether it's margins in one or more parts of an organization, there are some really clear benchmarks that investors have. And so when they're looking at the P&L of a company, there are things that are going to stand out. So you might need to understand, which of those metrics requires particular focus. On top of that, there's clearly a number of metrics, and I'd be happy to share some thoughts about what those are in each of the key areas. But really understanding what some of those are is very important.
Understood. You work with a lot of CCOs. Obviously, your consultancy is around that role. I saw some statistics that the average life of a CCO is 26 months in a company. That's very short. So to really you have just a short span of time to prove the value. What do you see as the top 2 or 3 metrics that or initiatives that CEOs expect from CCOs to deliver?
Yeah, I think some of the key metrics are right now there's a huge focus on retention rates and net dollar retention. So the gross retention is how much of your core is still there at the end of a period of time. And then with the net dollar retention, how much are you keeping? And then how are you expanding? I think that's one key metric. A second key metric is a set of profitability metrics. And these may not be across the whole organization, but frequently profitability of a services or implementation team and profitability of a support organization. Those tend to be common. Some organizations that have an education component that get pulled in. So I think those are the 2 key output metrics. And then there's a number of different input metrics that I think about that affect those outcomes. So for example, net promoter score that is sometimes captured at the end of an onboarding process or periodically through a customer's life cycle. Those are key input metrics that give you an indication of how happy that client is and whether they're going to both stay with you and grow their business with you. And I think another one is time to value. This is becoming increasingly important. Our clients seeing, quick value, what was discussed in the sales cycle, is that happening when they start to use your solutions? So I think about it, from a CCO level role of what are the input metrics and what are the output metrics? And as I mentioned before, getting alignment with your executive team about what are the key output metrics that are important to your company and also important to your company in the next coming fiscal periods.
Understood. Obviously, a lot of functions will be reporting under such scenario to the CCO. Which of the organizations or heads of organizations do you think are more apt to step into the role of CCO among success, support, professional services, customer experience, operations, or even outside of the customer organization, maybe sales or marketing?
Yeah, I think what's happened in the last 5 or 7 years is with the evolution of this customer success function and community, driven by Gainsight, among others. There's been a lot of focus on creating that role and the value of a customer success or a CSM organization in driving retention and driving growth in organizations. And that's created a lot of opportunities for leaders to sort of step up into first management and then leadership and then potentially executive roles. So I think that's been one clear career path for that. It has elements of both the operational metrics, because they often are measured on retention rates or expansion. So they're used to delivering operational metrics. And they're also just creating presence among executive teams and boards about the impact of some of these new metrics that companies are now focusing on this long-term results. That said, I think there's a lot of value in having individuals in those leadership roles that have worked across each of these different functions. And I'd really encourage people that are interested in evolving into some type of CCO role or a role that's responsible for each of those, each of the potential pillars in a customer-facing set of organizations, to do tours of duty in each of those. It's very helpful. Each organization has different metrics, has different levers, works with customers in different ways. So I think there's going to be a growing number of people who have that skill set to be able to impact company results at the C level.
Understood. Recently, we're seeing a lot of customer support leaders that actually are in charge of also success as well as support together, and really complementing one another, because each of them are addressing different set of issues or problems customers are facing, and do it both reactively, responsively, as well as proactively reaching out to the customers. Now, I'm seeing actually some support leaders have taken on this role because support centers have traditionally been the logical place to collect the voice of the customer information. It's a place where most of the team are interacting with customers every day, and many support centers also do surveys, CSAT, NPS, customer effort score, and also as a result of the interactions that we have with the advent of technology, they can uncover customer sentiment and feedback in ways that was not possible through unstructured conversations, either text or voice of a customer feedback. So the AI enhanced analytics have helped them to become, raise themselves up to sort of become a voice, the de facto voice of the customer proxy in the organization. And I don't know what your thoughts on that. When everybody is busy doing their own jobs, where support is there to help customers, as a result of their engagement with the customer, they learn a lot about the customer situation.
I've always been surprised that more support executives haven't evolved into this chief customer officer type of role. The skills that individual has, I think, lend themselves perfectly to being in that role. So, I think that what they do bring, as you mentioned, is a really great understanding of customers, because their teams are interacting with them all the time. They are very data-driven and metrics-oriented, which I think is another key skill of a chief customer officer. They're used to applying data to help drive continuous improvement for experiences. and almost by nature, they need to be able to work well cross-functionally. They need to be able to work cross-functionally with the product organization, with the other post-sale organizations. So they always seem to have those core skills to take on that leadership role. My hypothesis has been that in order to step up, they would need to create opportunities to provide more strategic input toward metrics that the company is thinking about in terms of generating toward growth. I think that's been an evolution of the CCO role, from that early evolution of just being a place of gathering inputs to actually driving results. And with so many companies focused on top line growth and doing it increasingly efficiently, a support leader needs to be able to not just sort of manage their organization, do it well, do it repeatably, and do it increasingly efficiently, but be able to communicate to the executive team what the impact of doing that is on that top line growth. I think that's an opportunity for support leaders to be part of that strategic thinking at a company instead of the operational execution.
Yeah. Do you think that's a great point, Rod? Do you think that the support centers, with all the infrastructure that they set up for omni-channel communication with the customer, the tools that they have for voice and text and so forth, the AI and everything that they built, do you think they're equipped to solve broader range of customer problems beyond the break fix that they've traditionally been assigned to work on the customer adoption, user adoption issues, value? And even if they're equipped with the information about the financial aspect, renewals and so forth, be able to do facilitate the renewal and expansion motions through the support center. Are you seeing that?
I haven't seen that. I don't know. I think there are places where the role of that support executive can expand because of the information that they're gathering from their various listening posts, playing a broader role in education and training and community and creating advocacy among customers. So I think that's a lot of value. What I think more for the support leader is it's a potentially good platform to move from being a support leader to leadership of another function, so that you now have experience driving a support organization. And like, for example, at Marketo, the leader of support moved into our professional services organization. So he had the support experience for a long time at Marketo, then became a professional services leader, so that when he then became the post-sale leader at a growing SaaS company, he was aware of the impact of how all of these different functions played together in designing a good customer experience.
Very, very good. Thank you. When it comes to aligning these different organizations, regardless of which of these functions this CCO hailed from, or actually maybe even brought in from another company, what are your advice in enabling cross-functional alignment and collaboration amongst the customer-facing teams?
Right. I think that's one of the key roles of the leader. I sometimes use an analogy. If you've ever watched 5-year-olds play soccer, they all kind of run after the ball. There's like a big bunch ball effect. Yeah. And I think one of the roles of a CCO is helping each of the leaders on your team understand their position on the field, so that they don't all run after the same balls, after the same priorities and the same crises. What that requires then is the CCO to know enough about each of those functions to help be both a mentor and to set clear objectives for the leaders in each of those organizations, to foster the development of relationships between those leaders so that they can both understand what they do and the impact. And then third is encouraging those leaders to have trust in each other, so that when some new initiative comes up or some crisis or surprise happens in the organization, they all know what each other's role is on the team, and they can continue to trust each other to play their position. That really increases the efficiency of getting things done. It builds an organization of trust.
Yeah.
And it helps build those cross-functional relationships that are so important to designing an experience that feels like it's coming from the same company to your customers.
Awesome. From I'm hearing from you is the role of CCO either to create or foster, this already exists, a strong customer-centric culture, complete with accountability and ownership at all levels of the organization.
Yeah. When people say that the CCO or those other post-sale teams own the client relationship, that's never really the case, right? A marketing team is communicating with your customers. The sales organization is communicating with your customers. They're interacting with product all the day, all the time. So, really what they're doing is trying to create a cohesive set of experiences, and that leadership role in fostering sort of a one client view of the organization is so critical, and continuing to talk about it like that and fostering the relationships and finding ways to break down barriers, frankly.
Yeah. And how do you break down the barriers? Is it really by taking an outside in view of customer journey and then see how each of these organizations add value or interplay with the customer at different touch points in that journey? Is that you do it? Or I mean how you break down the silos, if you will?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is built on personal relationships, and having the CCO encourage their leaders to work collaboratively with leaders of other organizations. That's been particularly challenging this past year because you have a lot of leaders who, everybody's remote, so you're not running into people in an office or at offsites for those that are in different cities. You have a lot of new leaders that have joined companies that are struggling to figure out what their role is and haven't necessarily built those personal relationships. So I see this challenge increasing, regardless of whether companies go back into the office or not. There's going to be, increasingly important challenge and role of the CCO to help foster those relationships with people where maybe some of the things you used to do in the past to build those relationships no longer happen. And it now becomes, the risk is that it becomes very transactional, right? A CSM leader's interaction with the sales organization is to solve a particular problem rather than thinking about the long-term initiatives. A professional services team working with the product organization is solving a particular issue with a particular client versus putting in place a better process to get feedback from the consultants or your implementation advisors back into the product team to create long-term fixes. Mm-hmm. So this concept of balancing short-term interests versus long-term priorities to improve is a really great opportunity for CEOs to demonstrate their impact and skill in affecting an organization.
Understood. I mean, as I'm listening to you, it comes to me, for example, when I was a professional services consultant, my job was to basically go through the whole full cycle project implementation, have it turned over to the customer, maybe stay a little bit longer for making sure that the transition happens, and I'll be taken off to the next project. But from what I'm hearing from you, the relationship is so important that you want to come back and see how the customer is faring so many days or weeks or months after the deployment. Same thing I would think for a support engineer who's taking the customer call. It just doesn't suffice to make sure the customer issues are resolved, but staying longer and making sure that there are no other issues, making sure the customer is completely satisfied. These are a lot of times actually work against your, if you will, your MBOs or performance objectives. Right. Just focus on running your business. But this relationship nuances actually help, as you said, in fostering great relationship with the customer.
Yeah, thinking about that long-term relationship, both with the customer and with your internal stakeholders. One of the theories from the early days of sort of the CCO role and thinking about customer experience was the recognition of the importance of handoffs, that it wasn't a series of discrete interactions, right? There wasn't just an implementation process. that that followed a sales process, and then you have a support interaction, and then you have a renewal cycle. But these handoffs are so critical, and a role that the CCO has, I think, in a very positive way, is they're responsible for organizations that have a lot of those experiences, and they can help foster these good handoffs. Now, those handoffs require trust, and they require commitment of individuals in one function to do something that affects another function that might actually, be negative for their own results, right? So taking a little bit of extra time coming out of your implementation to either do a warm handoff to your premier support person or to your CSM requires effort and time to have that handoff and to do that well. Somebody that's coming out of a CSM process where they've been expanding adoption and maybe now gets handed off to the sales organization, who in that particular company might be responsible for closing the renewal contract or closing an expansion order. You have to really care about that next person, and that it makes the customer feel like they work at one company. But those processes don't always exist. So the CCO can play an important role in demonstrating the importance of doing things that build trust and make lives easier for other functional teams.
Very good. Thank you so much. I want to change the topic a little bit. Obviously, what I heard from you is enabling cross-functional collaboration, strengthening customer relationships. Those are very important. We didn't talk much about maybe training employees so they become more customer-centric, not only be really good at their craft for whatever position that you hire them, but pick up additional soft skills for dealing customer. And then maybe, if you could add some pointers for employee enablement.
This has been with the growth over the last couple of years of these post-sale roles, and particularly with so many new people coming into this customer success or customer success management function, there is an important role that training plays. And there are both hard aspects of the role as well as a lot of the soft skills, which again makes it challenging. And an organization needs to figure out what are the skills that you need to bring in that are innate or demonstrated experiences, and which are ones that you can train on the job. In a lot of these post-sale organizations, the ability to interact with a customer, demonstrate empathy, help solve problems, be able to think strategically and act on their feet is a critical set of skills, whether that's on an implementation or services team, whether that's through a CSM, whether that's a support engineer. And so really being clear about what's important to bring in and what you can train. Unfortunately, the post-sale organizations don't always have enablement teams like maybe a sales organization has. I definitely think that it's a great role if one can afford it. If not, it needs to become a priority to have some type of experience, both focused on an onboarding experience. What are the core skills? What are the core product knowledge? What are the expectations that a new person needs to bring to any of their roles, and setting that up in a structured way. And then being aware of what are some of the sort of the ongoing skills. Some of that can happen in a one-on-one environment with a manager who's very attuned to their employee and their individual needs. And some of them are things that are more systemic, like being aware of new product releases that any of those post-sale organizations need to be aware of, new marketing or messaging that's coming out so that everybody is speaking the same language. But balancing these short-term initiatives to deliver against the day-to-day, and then putting in place some of these initiatives to improve the future. And I would say building out an onboarding process and building out an internal team member training process falls into the group of activities that frequently gets dropped or is frequently sub-optimized. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about how companies have been able to find time to do that and how important that is.
No, that is, that is obviously a challenge, but also opportunity to make sure that everyone in the organization know about their roles and responsibilities, or are also accountable for delivering results for the customer and delivering great customer experience. Obviously, as an organization, we're not in every conversation. We're not in every, but we would like to be able to have pretty good indication of where customer lies in terms of different sentiments, with different interactions that they had with us, and that's where technology can help. And it's not just about recording the conversations, because there's a lot of it. I mean, this conversation is being recorded, and probably at some point in the future by somebody would be a natural language process. What did Rod and Omid talk about? But that technology is available today. So when customers explain their issues and they want to maybe even a simple break fix, as a result of a conversation they have with a support engineer, there's a lot that actually can be uncovered from the sentiment of the customer, whether they are they're happy with the way that they're getting service, they're happy with the product, they're happy with the brand and the relationship they have. Is there a risk for churn? So those can be called out, and be brought to a level that even a C-level person like yourself, if you're getting a call from a CEO and says, how my customer X is doing, which actually system do you go to? If you go in each of these system of records, support system has its own nuances and thousands of tickets and so forth. Customer success has a whole dashboard of customer propensities and the last conversations that CSM had. So same with sales, have their own system and so forth. So really, what is a true sentiment of the customer comes from any of these sources, and that's something that probably technology should help, because as you've experienced, when you grow to thousands of customers, there's no way the whole company know about every customer status. Needless to say, the CCO, when it's asked you tough questions, how is customer X is doing?
Yeah, I think you bring out an important point. Is there's so much data out there, and it's an important ability of these post-sale leaders to be able to interpret the data and then make decisions about it and figure out which of the, like, when you think about how many initiatives an organization can drive, particularly these days where there's so much transition happening and people adjusting to work at home and maybe going back to the office. Like, what are those couple of initiatives that you're going to put in place that are going to move the needle materially in those metrics that your company cares about right now? And having those discussions to understand what are the metrics, understanding what is the data out there, what are the things you're listening for. As you and lots of folks out there are probably aware, you can always find a customer that's willing to tell you that you're great and that you're terrible. And even within a particular company, understanding the sentiment of a company, it's really a summary of all of the people that work at a company that interact with you and your product. So how do you interpret that and then use it to practically make decisions both for the immediate term and the long term?
Yes. And do you see the role of the CCO, where you get all these feedback, if you will, whether it's sort of a lagging indicator in the form of a survey that happened last month or last quarter, or some real-time input that came through a support system that customer actually raised an issue, a propensity to churn? How would you, either for that particular customer or group of customers who are expressing frustration, let's say, with certain product, how would you actually orchestrate a response to that customer, which I call it feedback, although it's a sentiment, but it's really their feedback in terms of how their experience has been. Any thoughts, any tips you have for audience?
Well, I can tell you how not to do it. Sometimes you hear that, your CEO gets a call from, the executive's buyer at a company, and they say they're having a problem with your software. And next thing you know, you've got 12 people on a call and all of their managers and everybody's swarming to figure out like what's happening with this customer. I think that is, not a good approach. But I do think what one can do is, if you're constantly having dialogue about clients that are potentially at risk or not having a good experience, and there's a forum to both pull in the data from these various diagnostic tools and then tie that to what you've heard, hopefully from people that are having those regular interactions with them, whether that's a CSM, whether it's someone in the sales organization that's maybe checking in. At Gainsight, we had a process called strategic alignment, where there was not just the day-to-day interaction with maybe a primary user in the CSM, but there was some, particularly for larger clients, some executive sponsor at Gainsight tied to an executive sponsor or buyer at a client, where they're checking in on the overall, like how is that individual? What are they hearing from their organization that can be an indicator? Doesn't always mean that you need to jump on it and solve every client's, individual issues. But if you do that as a regular part of your business, you start to hear themes. And again, going back to what are the small number of priorities that will move the needle, those themes help inform the decision. I think it can be dangerous to take one client's experience and then just translate that into, we've got a problem with all clients.
Got it. Yes, that's so true. Obviously, you need a bigger sample data, more accurate. But when actually you identify a problem, and that is something that comes maybe resoundingly so from a customer, do you see the role of the CCO to provide the tools and change management for whatever function? It could be certain product area, could be engineering, could be cloud operations, even the way product was positioned, marketing, sales. Do you see the role of that person to make sure that issue is resolved, and then maybe go back to the customer and say, thank you for your feedback. We were able to do this, and this is, hopefully you see your experience and improvement. Sort of closing the loop, if you will, to customer feedback.
Ideally, I think there's sort of two levels to that. If it's a particular customer with a particular issue, I don't necessarily believe that needs to involve the CCO. Again, going back to the point about, does the leader below that understand their role, or is there a manager that feels accountable for solving it? And then if you have strong relationships, that leader can work with their cross-functional leader. Ideally, there's a process in place to do that so that it's not a one-off crisis. But if there's not, at least there's some understanding between those two leaders that this is a priority. I think the CCO is more valuable in identifying the trends and themes to help drive larger cross-functional initiatives. So, for example, at a previous company, there was a big initiative around simplification. And so the CCO could be an advocate and say, hey, what are we doing across all of our teams to align to this company initiative around simplification, and making sure that people are allocating the time for those corporate initiatives, and also in some cases driving corporate initiatives that are particularly important to their organizations that require input from other teams, because everybody's got their day-to-day, which probably takes up just about all of their efforts. And then you've got their own priorities to improve in a marketing team or a sales team. And then you have priorities to improve in somebody else's organization, where there might be a subject matter expert or someone who's got a unique skill that you're trying to get into your team. And you think about just all of the different things that have, generally the same people who are good that can help drive these changes. So really, it's a prioritization issue more than anything.
Got it. Well, what I'm hearing from you, Rod, is that by the time perhaps it gets to the level of a CCO, probably it's too late, and all the alarms have been sounding. So if a customer has an issue, you're advocating maybe a shorter circuit between where that point of entry of customer issue was. Could be a support system, for example, a ticket, and the responsible party, which could be, for example, a product or cloud operations or some group that are beneficiary, or that they can actually make a difference. If you could actually make that collaboration possible between the product and support, you will be you'll be probably better off as opposed to going all the way up for each of these individual customer issues. Is that fair?
Yeah, to make this repeatable and scalable, a client having a particular issue that gets escalated through some channel is not an abnormal situation. That's what a lot of the different post-sale teams do for their day-to-day. And unfortunately, these can happen regularly. So if there's a process in place to handle a customer with a particular issue, there's points of contact that are driving it and held accountable to make sure that they get resolved. What tends to get escalated is when there's activities that happen again and again, and there's not an agreed upon process to address it. I've heard about this concept of sort of a circle of stress, where at an executive staff meeting, the CCO is participating in the CEO staff meeting, and maybe there's something that comes up. Maybe like, is this going to be the week that something in my part of the business has a spotlight shown on it? People don't like to necessarily be in that circle of stress. So if you can keep the issues that come up, the escalations, you just handle them as part of the matter of fact. But when there's not a process, or the same things come up again and again, you end up in that zone where hopefully, a client might say it's taken a really long time to get live or see value, and maybe a CEO of a company reaches out to your CEO and brings something up. Maybe a big client churns. And then there's a question of, do you have a process in place to anticipate and help prevent that from getting to the point where it gets posted publicly or someone feels compelled to talk to the CEO? That's when it gets dangerous for the CCO, and it creates a lot of work afterwards to help address it. Understood.
Yes. In my interactions and at SupportLogic, my role is Chief Customer Officer, and I see a lot of my responsibilities are obviously not just working with the customers and making sure that our team are working smoothly across different areas of customer journey, but also the value that our team provides to other functions in the company. Product organization, for example, is building telemetry of customer data. And I've seen actually a lot of times as a head of support success, you actually visit the support the product team and say, oh, we have all this data. Why don't they like to share it with you? At the same time, you have all this customer feedback and from support system that product organization is interested in looking at. So a lot of it is actually making sure that and this is probably a departure from the early version of customer success, that they were the voice of the customer, if you will. But really, it's about democratizing customer information. It's about making sure that engineering benefits from customer insight. At the same time, your customer-facing team know about the latest innovation and changes that happen in engineering, product, cloud operations, as well as the go-to-market, marketing, and so forth. So it's a lot of it actually for CCO to be orchestrating the interactions between their team and other functional areas in the company. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. I think that the post-sale organizations are in the best place in the company to gather information. They're seeing all of the variations of how your clients are using your services. And what it does on top of all of this telemetry and data that's being gathered is that it puts a personal voice on it. So I think it's super important not to just, look at the data as it sort of gets calculated in systems, but supplement that with the stories of how that affects clients in their use or inability to use a solution. So I am a huge advocate for gathering information, and whether it's in focus groups or one-on-one settings, whether it's with your own employees or with partners, and giving them a voice to really tell the stories about what is the impact of issues that come up, bugs that come up, and also the really positive stories. We all kind of get it. We've talked a lot about the things that can go wrong, but there's tons of stuff that goes right. And I think that's an increasingly important part of the value of these post-sale leaders and the CCO is to be the storyteller of the impact that that a customer has from the solutions. How do they feel about it?
Very true. I mean, you made a very good point about, and I do remember in my early career as a customer success leader, this whole notion of red, yellow, and green. It was sort of, we were all naturally trained to take the red out, which is actually working on the most complex problems, the toughest problems. Those are, the redder the account is, obviously you want to take that out. But sometimes actually you want to look at what made an account green. What is it that they like about us? Because then you can do more of those and attract more customers. As well as, obviously, you don't want to lose customers unless you really want to lose them. I mean, if they're not profitable in the long term, maybe there is a mutual path. Maybe they chose the wrong product and so forth. But invariably, you want to save all customers, make sure that they're happy, take the red out. But some of it comes actually to understand what is it that we're doing really well that they like.
Sometimes taking the red out is really hard. And sometimes putting more green out is within the control of the individuals. So how does the leader at whatever level resist the urge to just focus on all the red and fix problems versus make sure that your team members can do more of the things that drive the green and reinforce that? You think about, how hard it is if there's red based on product issues, or the product isn't easy to use, or it takes a long time to get to market. That could take years to improve, the product's ease of use or something. Where, and this is sometimes where post-sale organizations feel like they have to make up for promises of things that don't work exactly like they do. But nonetheless, that's part of the role of creating those delighters. Sometimes it's creating workarounds, it's finding best practices, it's being proactive and prescriptive that make a difference. Because a lot of times that sentiment can shift, not about the overall experience, but how did you have some interaction where somebody helped you solve a business problem or introduced you to a client that has a similar challenge and helped you overcome something. So I think it's really a great point that you made about focusing on those delighters and things that make clients green and reinforcing and telling the stories, not just talking about stuff that goes wrong. And sort of tying back to an earlier point about the role of a support leader and the opportunity to, take on roles that could be a chief customer officer type or level role of, sometimes a support leader is dealing, largely with things that are going wrong. So they get good at that. How do they help tell stories that talk about the impact of their organization on growth, on delighting clients, so that it becomes part of the strategic layer of the company and not just a problem-solving organization?
Right, that's so true. I'm actually seeing some of the support organizations are calling themselves customer advocate organization, which is, they're representing the customer point of view in the company. At the same time, obviously, they help customers and support. Or one of our customer advisory board members, he's head of customer support and engagement, because they engage customers more proactively and they make all the channels possible for customers to reach out to them and interact with them. So those are really good points that you brought up in terms of, it's, obviously customers want the resolution to their problems, but especially now in the post-COVID days, if they see actually somebody, a human being is on the other side, that's actually listening to them and acting on their requests, or even before the request comes in, they proactively, for example, they escalate their case. They say, I know this has been sitting there for a while, and this case, and I'm paying attention to it. I'm going to bring in the right person. The experience that customer goes through with the support engineer or manager or specialist that comes in to help, it would be invaluable. Actually, you build loyal fans because they remember you for the time that spent with you when they were in trouble and how you helped them.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think the support organization, through the frequency and quality of the interactions and the impact that those have an enormous impact on how a customer feels about their interactions with a company. It's possibly the people that they interact with most at a company. And it's certainly how you bring the organizational sentiment to some of that decision making. So the support leaders that are have teams that are providing great support, that are being a little bit more prescriptive and about solutions, introducing best practices and tips, and following up with clients. I think getting that sentiment, some of the analysis that Support Logic can do to help both with the internal productivity and also the follow-up with clients afterwards is really important, and to be able to take action on the most important activities and themes that you hear in those channels.
Very true. Very good. Anything else we should talk about? I'm looking at if there are any questions from audience. Did we miss anything, Rod, before we wrap up our conversation?
There's a couple things I'd like to just highlight for CCOs that are both in growing companies and maybe thinking about what the second half of the year looks like. One is the challenge of supporting growth at a company and understanding that as a company grows from 10 million to 50 million to 100 million to 250 million, maybe to $1 billion, that the needs of different organizations and leaders change. And so to be aware of connecting with your CEO and CFO, find out what's important now, and then being able to align your organization to those goals. Second thing that I see happening is with a lot of companies, perhaps over the summer, with the efficacy of the vaccines going out of the populations, some of the companies are going to be taking a look at what are some of the decisions around having people go back to the office. And there may be, I tend to think that there's going to be a great reshuffling of team members, both internally, people that aren't happy that you can't go back to the office. Maybe they really want to go back to the office, or that are required to go back to the office, but it may not, they've gotten used to working at home. So I would expect that there's going to be turnover at all levels of an organization. And also that same thing's going to be happening at your clients. So just be aware that a lot of those relationships that your teams have built, both internally from your side and with clients, they may get shuffled around because either the person on your side or the person on the client side are no longer there. So think about how you document and have those good handoffs so you don't miss out on capturing that historical information.
Awesome, Rod. Great two parting comments. If I could paraphrase it, they mentioned first time as you were invariably growing, working very closely with the CEO, and you mentioned CFO, which means that really not only delivering on the strategies that the CEO lays out for you and your organization, but also CFO making sure that it's done cost effectively. You're running a business, and as you specialize and add more people, becomes a big cost to the organization. So make sure that the value and the ROI obviously is there from the CFO standpoint. And the second point, especially as we are getting ready to go back to the office, and many would be continuing to work from home, and the changes, the customer contacts and everything. I mean, we are entering a new economy post-COVID. So be prepared for the change.
Yes.
So I think both those advices were about changes, weren't they?
Yeah, I think the role of the CCO is all about anticipating where the company is growing, preparing your team, your leadership team for where your business needs to be, and then figuring out how you can make sure you continue to deliver on the day-to-day. But at a C-suite level, they should try to be minimizing their focus on the day-to-day and making sure that you're putting in place the priorities to improve to support your company's growth.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rod, for your wisdom, for spending time with us. I had a lot of takeaways. Hopefully our audience do it too. Hopefully we'll see everyone in next month's episode of Service Experience Live. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Amit.